Hello again, Llewellyn King here for ME/CFS Alert. Today I'm joined by Leah Williams, who is a climate science, but also, alas, the mother of two ME/CFS patients. Her children, they've been affected for a long time, and she is going to talk about them and their experience. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Sadly, you have two children who are severely afflicted with ME/CFS, is that correct?
Well, I would say that they are moderately affected, and for that I'm actually very grateful. My son is 21. He got sick when he was 12. It seemed like a perfectly ordinary cold, except that he never got well again. He got sort of sicker and sicker for a few years. He was too sick to go to high school. The high school really couldn't deal with that. He effectively dropped out of high school. Got a GED, he spent a couple years sort of pulling himself together, and then has actually been getting very gradually a little bit better, and he's in college now, which we're very excited about. He started at UMass Amherst in the fall as a freshman, and he's
What is he going to study?
He's going to be a computer science major. He's just taking the introductory classes for that.
And is there any particular therapy which has led to his improvement?
No, so we tried everything. We went to tens of doctors, tried many different, medications, natural therapies, acupuncture, massage, diet, these really strict diets with you cut out everything except brown rice and broccoli. Nothing helped. And eventually he just said, I'm never going to see another doctor. I just really don't want to do this anymore. So we stopped. And
does he take any medications at all?
Nothing. And he's very proud of that.
And then your daughter is also.
And then my daughter, who is now 18, she also got sick when she was 12. We happened to know it was an adenovirus infection, but it doesn't really matter what the virus was. Again, it seemed to trigger just some response in her body. She also kind of got sicker and sicker. She managed to go to school part-time for the first few years. Now she's really too sick to go to high school, so she's taking online classes through our high school extension program. And that actually works out pretty well for her because the schedule is very flexible. So if she has a bad week, she doesn't do any schoolwork. When she has a better week, she can kind of catch up.
This is very terrible in children, isn't it? To see life passing by. And
absolutely.
They cannot participate in it.
Right.
They're in a different track in life.
Yes. So they lost out on going to high school. Both of them lost almost all of their friends. They can't do sports, they can't do music, they can't go on school trips.
I was going to ask about their social life.
Right, so my children are very different. My son is a fairly reserved person, and he does not really have any close friends his age right now. He's a very, personable person. He gets along well with people. He's easy to talk to, but he does not really have any close friends his age. He says he doesn't mind that he just doesn't have the energy for that. My daughter is a very social person. I think it was really hard for her to lose her grade school friends. They just really didn't understand what was going on with her. They would say things like, oh, you're so lucky you don't have to go to school, which was not her perspective at all. But in the last year or so, she's actually made some new friends, most of whom don't actually know she's sick. She manages to fake it well enough. So she does have a social life. Do
you think that this suggests a genetic predisposition, as some physicians have suggested?
I think there is a genetic predisposition. I don't think we know nearly enough about it to say for sure one way or the other, but it's not uncommon for multiple children in a family to have ME/CFS. So. And
you've had a struggle finding doctors?
Yes, we've been to a lot of doctors, and fortunately with both kids we had a pediatrician who knew what the illness was and was willing to make the diagnosis, but of course they wanted to send us to specialists to rule out various other things or to see if the specialists could help. And each specialist sort of looks at their narrow little piece of it and says, well, that piece isn't so bad. And there was nobody who was kind of willing to look at the whole picture and say, okay, all these pieces together are debilitating. So that's kind of been the struggle. And then of course, because each specialist says, well, that piece isn't so bad, they haven't really recommended
You see
treatments.
Some of the stovepiping in the research too, don't you? Where it gets very narrow.
Right.
Different physicians or researchers are looking at different aspects, different bodily fluids or analysis of bodily fluids, or they're looking at the stomach lining, or they're looking at the brain, or they're looking at the central nervous system. I wonder how damaging that is to the totality of the effort.
Yeah, I think the bigger problem is there just has been very little research funding and therefore very little research. I mean, I think research is a little different, and you do have to focus on one system and try to figure out what's wrong there. But I think with doctors, it would be really helpful if there were people who took a more holistic approach and just said, okay, there's this whole cluster of symptoms and we have to sort of look at the whole thing. But that's very hard to find in the way our medical system is set up. That's not really encouraged.
And apart from your work and looking after your children, you're also very active in the Massachusetts ME and FM Association. And tell me about that and your activity there and your activism there.
So I started by going to one of our local events, which I think are very important. I think that's something where a local association really has a very good function. And at that event, Charmian introduced me to another mother who...
Charmian is the chairwoman.
Yes, the president. She introduced me to another woman who had 3 kids with ME/CFS, and that was the first person I met who was in my situation. And that was so valuable to meet somebody and be able to talk to them. And, you know, even though there's no treatment and there's no cure, it still is just helpful to know there's other people who are in your situation and who are sympathetic. And then several years later, Charmian always asks for volunteers, and I said I could volunteer some time. So my kids were a little bit older and I wasn't spending as much time taking them to doctors. And Charmian asked me to take over the membership database, which I did. And then a couple years later, I became the treasurer. So now I'm the treasurer. And you don't have enough money in your treasury, I assume. Well, we have barely enough. We sort of manage to function at a small level. But one of our big activities recently is advocacy. And so we've been sending people to Washington, both to take part in the CFS Advisory Committee, which is an interagency committee that advises the Assistant Secretary of Health. And then we've also been doing lobbying on Capitol Hill, trying to get some activity in the Senate or the House that would push for more research funding. But those things are expensive, right? Paying for people to travel to Washington costs a fair amount of money.
How do you feel about the whole issue of lobbying in Washington? Most diseases, even smaller ones like MS, which in total numbers of the afflicted is smaller by quite a lot, according to the numbers we know, have huge presence in Washington and very aggressive on Capitol Hill. And, this seems to work. They get the money or more money out of the National Institutes of Health.
Think it's very unfortunate, but that's how our political system works. And so something like ME/CFS is at a distinct disadvantage because we don't have money, and most of our patients are so sick they can't go to Capitol Hill and make a fuss.
Do you go yourself? Have you?
Yes. I was actually there last week so SMCI, the National Advocacy Organization, and ME Action, which is another national patient organization, did a whole series of visits on Capitol Hill last week, and I joined in with the ones for Senator Warren and Senator Markey from Massachusetts, and also I visited one other senator with them. And then I was also in Washington a few weeks ago, again visiting Senator Warren's office, Senator Markey's office, and my representative, Catherine Clark's office, with our requests.
Have you had a good reception?
Well, it's a long process getting politicians interested in things, and they're always willing to say, well, we'll support it if somebody else does something. But we actually have had some big progress recently, which I'm not sure is quite public knowledge yet. I think SMCI will probably be announcing something very soon.
What do you tell parents when this terrible diagnosis arrives in the family? What do you tell them? Clearly their lives are going to be, they may not know this, but are going to be different going forward, as are forever, possibly, the lives of their children.
Right.
What do you say to them?
So I actually wrote a little piece about that for our website, and I had 4 points. One was to believe your child, because I think a lot of parents, and we did this too, when our kids were first sick, just thought if we just push our kids out the door and make them go to school, they will be okay. They can do that. And it just wasn't true, and it caused enormous stress in our family for us to be pushing our kids to do something that they just really couldn't do. So I think, believe in your kids and believe that they know sort of how much they can do. My kids loved going to school. They were very sad about not being able to go to school. They weren't shirking in any way. So that's one thing. And then another thing is to be hopeful. The prognosis is actually better for people who get it as children. So for adults, the recovery rate is...
That's very interesting. The prognosis is better. There's a chance of recovery.
There is. So there was one long-term study in Australia that suggested that about 25% of people who got it as kids recovered in the sense that they felt they were leading a normal life. About 50% sort of got better to the point where they could have a fairly normal life. It probably wasn't the same life they would have had if they'd never been sick, like maybe they chose a low-stress job, or they worked part-time, or they sort of limited their activities. And then about 25% just didn't get better and were sick.
There is some feeling that this is more severe in women than men.
It's definitely more prevalent in women. I don't know that it's more serious for women. I know men who are very debilitated.
Yeah, so do I. But you have this laboratory in your home, really, to study that.
Right.
Not that you want to have this laboratory, but you have it.
Yeah, it's such a heterogeneous illness. It's so different for every person. I would say that at my son's worst point, he was actually sicker, I think, than my daughter is at sort of the same point in her illness. But my son seems to have recovered, to a level where he can actually function in college. And I'm hopeful that will happen for my daughter, but we really just don't know at this point. So,
describe a bad day in your daughter's life.
So right now, a bad day, she sleeps until 10 or 11 in the morning. She wakes up, she says, I feel awful. She rolls over, she sleeps for a few more hours. She gets up, she says, I feel so awful. She might come downstairs, lie on the couch for a bit, read a book, or she just stays in bed. I mean, she is bedbound on her worst days.
With both of your children, the relationship between exercise and relapse is usually fairly...
It's very obvious.
Very obvious.
Yes.
You see that too.
Absolutely.
For example, if your son went to the theater tonight, would he likely be sick tomorrow?
Well, I think where he is right now, he might actually be able to do that okay. But so my son, about a year ago, wanted to do one of these Couch to 5K, online programs. And I was really nervous about it. I thought it was going to make him really sick. He did it. He was actually okay. They build up very, very slowly. But after he'd gotten up to running 3 miles regularly, he said to me, is it supposed to hurt this much? Every time I go for a run, it just hurts so much. And I said, no, that's not normal. That's this illness, right? He can't do exercise.
Did he make the 5 miles?
He was able to run 3 miles or 5 kilometers.
Oh, 5 kilometers,
but it was just intensely painful every step of the way. And that's not normal.
He must be very brave.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Did he collapse afterwards?
No, I think he's actually in a place right now where he can get some exercise without causing a really serious relapse.
I've seen patients when I have doing this, interviews or doing regular television programs or other activities, wiped out the next day.
Yeah.
Full of life that day and no life the next day.
Right. That used to happen to him. I remember we went to a family celebration and he wanted to run around with the other kids who were playing tag. He did that for maybe 10 minutes and then he looked like he was going to die. He was just pale. He couldn't move. He spent the next week in bed, so that kind of thing definitely happens to him.
We want to make sure that we have the website for Massachusetts CFS ME and FM Association on, what is it? And we'll put it up on the screen.
So our website is www.masscfids.org. It's MASSCFIDS. And we have a lot of information there for patients. We have a newsletter that you're welcome to sign up for, and we also have a contact us form. So if you have anything you want to know from us or get in touch with us, you can use that.
How much outreach are you able to do at the association to actually go and help sick people? Essentially, is there a Meals on Wheels dimension?
No. So our outreach is in the form of physician referral service. And also just listening. Actually, we do a lot of just listening, call people on the phone and just talk to them. Or at our events, we actually have people who are designated to just listen to people's stories. And sometimes when somebody's just been diagnosed, they have had no one that they can talk to who is sympathetic and understanding or supportive.
We get telephone calls from states where there are no doctors known, and where there is no proper diagnosis and people are self-diagnosing after a long struggle.
Right.
It's very sad and very disturbing to think that they're all alone. And of course, if they're in economic distress, so much the worse.
Absolutely.
And the economic distress for many patients is severe.
Absolutely, yes.
Leah Williams, thank you for joining me on CFS Alert, and very good luck with your children.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And good luck with your good work.
Thank you.
It's very necessary.
Thank you.